An unlikely animal with a forgotten past emerges on a remote farm. When danger quietly arrives, it becomes the only hope. And what it does will defy everything you believe is possible. The sun was rising behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange. At Hope Valley Ranch, Jack Wilson was already up, feeling the dew that moistened his bare feet as he walked across the yard. Though blind for more than 10 years, the patriarch kept alive the visual memory of his property. Every sound, every aroma, every texture beneath his feet told a story that his eyes could no longer see. "Jack, coffee's ready," Martha called from the kitchen window. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee invaded the man's nostrils, making him smile as he turned toward the house. "Coming, woman. Just enjoying the smell of the earth after the rain. That's priceless." At the rustic kitchen table, the Wilson family gathered for breakfast. Emma, the eldest daughter, was setting the table while Ryan, the youngest, entered carrying a bucket of fresh milk. "Dad, I think the fence on the north side is loose again. I also saw some strange marks over there," Ryan commented, helping himself to a piece of cheese. "What kind of marks?" asked Jack, furrowing his brow. "Looks like tire tracks, but not from our tractor. They're different." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car approaching. It wasn't common to receive visitors so early, especially in a place as remote as Hope Valley Ranch. "Someone's coming," announced Emma, going to the window. Looks like Sergeant Barnes, and he's not alone." Martha rose hurriedly to receive the visitor. Sergeant Barnes was an old family friend, a retired police officer who used to visit the ranch a few times a year. But this time, as Emma had noted, he wasn't coming alone. "Good morning, folks of Hope Valley," Barnes called out as he stepped down from his pickup truck. His khaki uniform, though faded by time, still maintained the impeccable posture of his days on the force. "I've brought some special company for you." From the back of the pickup, Barnes removed an animal that left everyone speechless. It was a goat with fur as black as coal, deep amber eyes, and an almost military posture. The animal didn't seem frightened or agitated. On the contrary, it observed everything around it with disconcerting attention. "This is Major," Barnes introduced, as the goat remained perfectly still beside him. "He's not an ordinary goat. He was trained in a special police unit to recognize suspicious patterns and emit alert signals." Jack, even without seeing the animal, approached slowly. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Major didn't move when the farmer's calloused fingers touched his soft fur. "He's a handsome animal by the looks of it," Jack commented, feeling the texture of the animal. "But a police goat? Does such a thing really exist, Barnes?" The ex-sergeant smiled, stroking the animal's neck. "This one is unique, my friend. He was part of an experimental project that ended up being discontinued. I retired, and so did he, but I thought he might be useful here at the ranch." Emma and Ryan exchanged skeptical glances. Martha served coffee to Barnes while everyone sat on the porch to hear the full story. Major was trained to identify sounds, odors, and behaviors out of the ordinary. He patrolled isolated rural areas, helping protect remote farms. The project ended, but his skills remain intact. "And why did you bring him to us?" questioned Martha, watching distrustfully as the goat now calmly explored the yard. Barnes took a sip of coffee before answering, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been hearing things about strange movements in the region. I thought you might benefit from an extra pair of eyes, or rather, a pair of attentive ears and a sensitive nose." Major, as if understanding they were talking about him, turned and looked directly at the group on the porch. His gaze briefly met Emma's, sending a shiver down her spine. "He seems to understand what we're saying," the young woman murmured. "Sometimes," replied Barnes with an enigmatic smile. "I think he understands more than all of us." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. A week had passed since Major's arrival at Hope Valley Ranch. Against all expectations, the black goat had quickly adapted to the routine of the place, as if he had been part of it for years. On the sunny Sunday morning, as the family prepared for lunch, Ryan observed the animal with growing curiosity. "I've never seen an animal behave like this," he commented to his sister, who was helping harvest vegetables from the garden. "Yesterday, when I went to check the barn, he stood staring at the woods for almost an hour. Didn't move an inch." Emma looked up from the lettuce bed. "I noticed something else strange. The chickens have been agitated for 3 days, especially at dawn. I wake up to them squawking as if they've seen a fox." "And have you seen any fox?" "No, that's the problem. I haven't seen anything, but they remain frightened." Inside the house, Jack was sitting at the kitchen table, his wrinkled hands peeling an orange with the precision of someone who sees with his fingers. Martha was preparing lunch when her husband called to her in a low voice. "Martha, have you heard anything different during the night?" The woman stopped stirring the pot and approached. "What do you mean, different?" "Yesterday, when I couldn't sleep, I kept listening. Someone's walking near the western boundary, light footsteps but firm." Martha felt a chill. Living at the ranch for more than 30 years, she knew every sound, every creak of the old wood, every whistle of the wind through the cracks. And her husband, since losing his sight, had developed an almost supernatural hearing. "I'll talk to the kids, maybe it's some animal." "It's not an animal, Martha. Animals don't stop walking when you turn on the kitchen light." The conversation was interrupted when the door opened and Major entered the kitchen, his hooves making a rhythmic sound against the ceramic floor. The goat stopped in front of Jack, as if waiting for something. "What is it, partner?" asked the patriarch, extending his hand to pet the animal. Major emitted a short, deep sound before turning and walking to the old radio that sat on the counter. "He wants you to turn on the radio," observed Martha, surprised. "That's the 3rd time this week." Jack turned on the device. Immediately, Major sat in front of the radio, ears erect, completely motionless as the announcer reported local news. A report about strange movements in the region caught everyone's attention. Residents of Pine Creek report the disappearance of agricultural equipment in recent months. Authorities are investigating the possibility of an organized gang operating in isolated rural areas. Ryan and Emma entered the kitchen in time to hear the news. The young man looked at Major, who remained attentive to the radio. "Seems like our friend knows something we don't," he commented. That afternoon, while the family was having lunch, an unknown car stopped at the ranch gate. A tall man, wearing a hat and dark glasses, approached with calculated steps. Seeing him, Major, who had been grazing peacefully in the yard, raised his head and became completely motionless. "Good afternoon," the stranger greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Paul Matthews. I'm interested in buying some young goats for my property in the neighboring county." Jack, sitting on the porch, frowned upon hearing the man's voice. There was something in that intonation that made him uncomfortable. "We're not selling animals at the moment, sir," Ryan replied, maintaining a cautious distance. "That's a shame," the man lamented, looking around as if taking inventory. "Beautiful property you have here. Quite isolated, isn't it? And how many people live in this house?" "Why do you want to know?" questioned Emma, approaching her brother. "Curiosity," replied the man, adjusting his dark glasses. "And this time of day is quiet around here, isn't it? Rarely see any movement." Major, who had been watching impassively until then, suddenly emitted a dry bleat and stamped his hoof on the ground exactly 3 times. The gesture caught the visitor's attention. "Interesting goat you have," he commented, narrowing his eyes. "I've never seen one so attentive." "He's not ours," explained Jack, rising from his chair with the help of his cane. "He's just a temporary guest." The man observed the blind old farmer, and something in his posture changed almost imperceptibly. "I see. Well, if you change your mind about the goats, I'll be in the region for a few weeks." He handed a card to Ryan and returned to his car, but not before casting one last analytical look at the property. As soon as the vehicle pulled away, Major again stamped his hooves on the ground, this time with more force. "I think our friend didn't like the visitor," observed Jack. "And to be honest, neither did I. There was something wrong with that man." "You didn't even see him, Dad," argued Ryan. "I don't need to see to know when someone is lying, son." The voice trembles in a peculiar way, and the man seemed more interested in our routine than in goats. The first rays of sun had barely touched Hope Valley Ranch when Ryan decided to better investigate the tire tracks he had found days before. Equipped with a flashlight and accompanied by Major, who seemed particularly alert that morning, the young man followed the path that skirted the north fence of the property. "What do you think, partner? Something's wrong around here, isn't it?" Ryan asked the goat, who walked a few steps ahead as if sniffing something. The marks they found were deeper and more defined than Ryan had initially imagined. These weren't just ordinary tire tracks, but from a heavy vehicle that had stopped several times along the fence. In some spots, the vegetation was flattened, as if someone had remained there for a long period. "Someone's been watching the ranch," Ryan murmured to himself. Major suddenly raised his head and fixed his gaze on a specific spot. Ryan followed, the direction indicated by the animal, and found something that left him paralyzed. A small camera, skillfully camouflaged among the branches of a tree, pointed directly at the main entrance of the house. My God. This isn't the work of common thieves. Carefully, Ryan climbed the tree and removed the device, examining it with trembling hands. It was sophisticated equipment, with a long-lasting battery and probably remote image transmission. At the house, Emma woke to the persistent sound of chickens. Such agitation wasn't normal at that hour. She quickly dressed and went to check. The chicken coop carrying a bucket of feed. The birds were huddled in a corner in an evident state of stress. "What happened to you?" she asked, spreading the grains on the ground. It was then that she noticed something strange. One of the boards on the back of the coop was slightly displaced, as if it had been removed and replaced in a hurry. She approached cautiously and, pushing the wood, discovered a small improvised compartment. Inside it was another camera, this time aimed at the back door of the house. "Ryan, Dad!" shouted Emma, running back to the residence. The family gathered in the living room, their faces tense as Ryan showed the devices found. Jack held one of the cameras, his fingers exploring every inch of the device with the heightened sensitivity of someone who depends on touch to understand the world. "This isn't the work of amateurs," concluded the patriarch, placing the device on the table. "Someone is interested in our routine, in our activities, and they know exactly what they're doing." "We need to call the police," suggested Martha, her face pale with concern. "And tell them what? That we found hidden cameras? That a stranger appeared asking questions? They'll take days to show up here if they come at all," argued Ryan. "Let's call Sergeant Barnes," decided Jack. "He'll know what to do, and it was he who brought Major to us. Maybe he knows more than he told us." While Emma was calling Barnes, Jack asked Ryan to take him to the exact spot where the first camera had been found. With Major at his side, the old farmer walked slowly, absorbing every sound, every vibration of the environment. "Stop here," Jack requested when they reached close to the tree where the device had been hidden. "Let me feel the place." Releasing his son's arm, Jack knelt and touched the ground around. His fingers found clues that Ryan's eyes had missed: small cigarette butts, a fragment of fabric caught on a thorn, subtle boot marks. "Someone stood here for a long time, several times," he concluded, rising with his son's help. And it wasn't just one person. Major, who had been observing the surroundings with attention, suddenly ran toward the woods that surrounded the property. His behavior was so unusual that Ryan hesitated only for an instant before following him, taking his father by the hand. "He found something," exclaimed the young man, trying to keep up with the goat's accelerated pace. About 100 yards from the fence, in an almost imperceptible clearing, Major stopped. The animal was staring fixedly at the ground, where Ryan discovered, horrified, the remains of an improvised camp, still warm fire ashes, food packaging, and most disturbing, several detailed maps of the region, with Hope Valley Ranch clearly marked in red. "Dad," whispered Ryan, his voice trembling, "I think we're being studied like prey." Jack squeezed his son's shoulder firmly. "Go back to the house now. Take your mother and sister to neighbor Joe's place. I'll stay here with Major until Barnes arrives." "I'm not leaving you alone, Dad." "I'm not alone," replied Jack, stroking the goat's head, which remained vigilant at his side. "Major is with me, and he seems to know exactly what's happening." At the ranch, while Emma repeatedly tried to contact Barnes, Martha made an equally disturbing discovery. While collecting clothes from the clothesline, she found a rusty knife partially buried near the well. It wasn't a family tool. Its blade had inscriptions in a language she didn't recognize. The atmosphere at Hope Valley Ranch had changed drastically. What was once a peaceful refuge in the mountains now seemed like a place surrounded by invisible shadows. And at the center of all the mystery, a black goat with guard instincts watched, alert, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal the true purpose of its presence there. Sergeant Barnes arrived at Hope Valley Ranch in the middle of the afternoon, his face marked with concern. His uniform, although no longer official, still gave him an aura of authority that brought some comfort to the Wilson family. After examining the cameras and maps found in the clearing, the ex-policeman remained silent for long minutes, immersed in dark thoughts. "You're not the first," he finally revealed, sitting at the kitchen table where the entire family was gathered. "In the last 6 months, at least 5 isolated rural properties have been targeted by a similar scheme." "What kind of scheme?" asked Ryan, leaning forward. Barnes hesitated, looking at Jack, who remained impassive, hands crossed on the table. "An organized group that thoroughly studies each property before acting. They map routines, identify vulnerabilities, monitor for weeks before making any move." "And what do they want?" inquired Emma, her voice trembling. "Land," Barnes answered, dryly. "Strategic lands that can serve as passage routes or support points for other operations. Hope Valley Ranch has a unique position, isolated with access to 3 country roads and close to the state border." Martha paled. "Are you saying they want to take our land?" "Not without resistance," stated Barnes, his gaze hardening. "That's why I brought Major to you. He was specifically trained to detect this type of activity. It wasn't a coincidence." Jack, who had been quiet until then, adjusted himself in his chair. "You knew we were in danger and didn't tell us the whole truth, Barnes. Why?" The ex-sergeant sighed deeply. "Because I wasn't sure, Jack. I suspected, yes. The other targeted farms had profiles similar to yours, but I didn't want to alarm you without concrete evidence. Major was my way of protecting you while I investigated." The explanation was interrupted by a deep, prolonged bleat from outside. Everyone turned to the window, where they saw Major standing in the middle of the yard, with his ears raised and his body completely motionless. "He's detected something," murmured Barnes, rising quickly. The next instant, Major darted toward the woods, moving with surprising speed for an animal of his size. Ryan and Barnes ran after him, followed by Emma, while Martha remained with Jack at the house. The chase lasted almost 20 minutes, with Major always maintaining sufficient distance not to be caught, but close enough not to be lost from sight. When the goat finally stopped, they were in an area of the ranch that was rarely visited, a small valley between 2 hills, where an old abandoned shed served as storage for broken equipment. "Why did he bring us here?" asked Ryan, breathless. Barnes didn't respond immediately. His trained eye scanned the location, noticing details that escaped the others. Recent tire marks in the earth, branches broken unnaturally, a piece of fabric caught on barbed wire. "Someone's been here." "Recently," he concluded, approaching the shed cautiously. The wooden door creaked when Barnes pushed it. The interior was dark and dusty, but even in the dim light, it was possible to see that someone had used the space. There were food remains, empty bottles, and more alarmingly, various notes and photographs of the Wilson family pinned to one of the walls. "My God," whispered Emma, bringing her hand to her mouth upon seeing images of herself working in the garden, of Ryan tending to the animals, and even of Jack on his morning walks. "This is sick," said Ryan, angrily tearing the photos from the wall. "Who would do something like this?" "Someone who knows the region well and has resources," replied Barnes, examining a detailed map that showed not only Hope Valley Ranch, but all the neighboring properties, with precise markings and annotations. Major, who had entered the shed, with them suddenly became alert, his ears moving in different directions, capturing sounds imperceptible to humans. With a deep bleat, the goat ran out again, this time toward the main house. "Something's wrong," exclaimed Barnes, following the animal with Ryan and Emma close behind. When they reached the house, they found Martha on the porch, her face pale with worry. "I can't find Jack. He said he was going to the well to get water, but it's been more than half an hour and he hasn't returned." Major didn't wait for another word. The goat darted toward the well, which was about 200 yards from the house, in a slightly lower area of the terrain. The three followed him, with Martha remaining at the house in case Jack returned. The well was deserted, the bucket still hanging on the rope, but with no sign of the patriarch. Major sniffed the ground in increasingly wide circles until he abruptly stopped near an area of unstable earth. There it was evident that there had been a recent landslide. The earth was disturbed, and there were marks of something or someone that had slid down the slope. "Dad!" shouted Ryan, running to the spot. "Dad, are you there?" There was no response beyond the echo of his own voice. Barnes approached the edge carefully, analyzing the marks in the soil. "He slipped here," the ex-sergeant concluded. The ground gave way under his feet. Major emitted a high and long sound that reverberated throughout the valley. It was a sound different from anything they had heard before, a call, an alert, a summoning. "He's calling for help," said Barnes, his expression serious. "We need to go down this slope now." The slope was steep and treacherous, with loose stones and sparse vegetation that offered little support. Ryan descended first, followed by Emma and Barnes. Major found his own way, jumping with impressive agility between the rocks. Ryan's heart beat erratically as he descended. His father, blind and vulnerable, could be injured or worse. Fear grew in his chest like a cold shadow, but something else also worried him. There were too many coincidences to ignore. The disappearance of Jack had happened just when they discovered the hideout and evidence of surveillance. "This was no accident," he murmured to himself, as his eyes desperately scanned the slope for any sign of his father. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. "Dad, where are you?" Ryan's voice echoed through the valley as he descended the slippery slope, followed closely by Emma and Sergeant Barnes. Major moved ahead of them with impressive agility, emitting small guttural sounds that seemed to indicate the correct path. After a few minutes of dangerous descent, the goat stopped abruptly, fixing his gaze on a small gap between two large rocks. Ryan approached and felt his heart race when he saw a familiar piece of fabric. It was from the shirt his father was wearing that day. "Here! I found something!" he shouted, pushing aside dry branches and loose stones to widen the opening. The space between the rocks led to a small depression where, to everyone's relief, they found Jack, sitting with his back against the rock, a trickle of blood running from a cut on his forehead, but conscious. "Dad, thank God." Ryan carefully embraced the patriarch, tears of relief streaming down his face. "I'm fine, son," replied Jack with a weak but firm voice. The ground suddenly gave way. I didn't have time to react. Barnes quickly examined the old man. "The cut on your forehead isn't deep, but we need to get you hydrated soon." "How long have you been here, Jack?" "Not sure, and the sun was still high when I fell. I tried to shout, but no one would hear from that distance." Major approached silently and touched Jack's arm with his muzzle in an almost human gesture of comfort. The patriarch smiled, recognizing the animal's presence by its characteristic smell. "It was you who found me, wasn't it, Major? You heard what no one else could hear." While they prepared a way to transport Jack back to the house, Barnes moved a few yards away to better examine the site. His trained eyes noticed something that the others, in their rush to help the patriarch, had ignored. Recent boot marks, different from those left by Ryan or himself. "Someone was here before us," murmured the ex-policeman, following the footprints that led toward the denser woods. Upon returning to the group, Barnes kept his discovery secret, not wanting to alarm the family further. With the help of Ryan and Emma, they improvised a stretcher with sturdy branches and brought Jack back to the house where Martha waited anxiously. "My God, Jack!" exclaimed the woman upon seeing her husband being carried. "What happened to you?" "Nothing. That a hot bath and a strong coffee won't fix, woman," he replied with a tired smile, trying to ease his wife's concern. While Martha and Emma cared for Jack, Barnes called Ryan to a corner of the room. "This was no accident," whispered the ex-sergeant, his face grave. "I found recent footprints near where your father fell. Someone was watching, perhaps waiting to see what would happen. Ryan felt his blood freeze. Are you saying someone might have caused the landslide? I can't say for certain, but the coincidence is disturbing, especially after what we found in the abandoned shed. That night, with Jack already recovered and resting, the family gathered in the kitchen to discuss the situation. Major remained alert near the window, as if standing guard. We can no longer ignore the signs, declared Barnes, placing the photographs and maps found in the shed on the table. You've been under observation for weeks, maybe months. And now, with what happened to Jack, it's evident they're moving from observation to more direct actions. But what exactly do they want? Asked Emma, her voice trembling. Barnes hesitated before answering, exchanging a significant look with Jack, who remained silent, his hands crossed on the table. I think it's time to tell the whole truth, the patriarch finally said, sensing the tension in the air. What truth, Dad? Ryan furrowed his brow, looking alternately at his father and Barnes. Jack took a deep breath before beginning. Hope Valley Ranch isn't just any property. Its location is strategic, not just because of its proximity to the state border, but for something few people know. There's an underground passage, Barnes completed, lowering his voice, a network of natural caves that begins within the boundaries of the ranch and extends for miles, crossing county lines and even state borders. Ryan and Emma's eyes widened in surprise. Martha lowered her gaze, already familiar with this long-kept secret. When I could. Still see, I discovered the entrance by chance, continued Jack. It was just a small hole among rocks, but upon exploring it I realized its true dimension. I kept the secret for years, telling only your mother and eventually Barnes when he was still active on the force. The caves were partially mapped by speleologists decades ago, explained Barnes, but the official records were lost in a fire at the county archives. Very few people know of the existence of this passage today. And why would that be so important now? Questioned Ryan, still confused. Because this passage allows the transport of goods and people without any monitoring, replied Barnes seriously. It's a perfect route for those who want to operate in the shadows, beyond the reach of authorities. So, that's why, murmured Emma, comprehending the gravity of the situation. It's not just our land they want, it's what's underneath it. Major, who until then had been silently observing from the window, suddenly stood up, his ears on maximum alert. His tense body indicated that something had caught his attention outside the house. Barnes immediately noticed the change in the animal's behavior. Someone's out there, he whispered, signaling for everyone to remain silent. At that moment, the ranch lights went completely out, plunging the house into the deepest darkness. The darkness swallowed the kitchen of Hope Valley. Ranch like a sudden wave. The silence that followed was so dense that even the breathing of those present seemed to echo. Nobody move, whispered Barnes, his voice barely audible. Ryan, where do you keep the flashlights? In the second drawer next to the stove, the young man replied in the same low tone. With the precision of years of training, Barnes moved in the darkness until he located the drawer. His fingers found a flashlight, but he didn't immediately turn it on. Jack, he murmured, you know this house better than all of us, even without seeing. In which direction is the entrance to the caves? Behind the old barn, the patriarch calmly replied. There's a rocky formation covered by bushes. The entrance is narrow but widens after a few yards. Major emitted an almost inaudible sound, moving silently to the back door. The goat's behavior indicated that he had detected external movements. They cut the power deliberately, Barnes concluded. They're trying to make us vulnerable, perhaps for an invasion. What are we going to do? Asked Emma, her voice trembling with fear. Barnes took a deep breath before answering. We'll go out the back door and head to the caves. If they want that passage so badly, it's because they don't know it completely. We'll use that to our advantage. Are you suggesting we flee from our own home? Questioned Ryan, indignant. It's not fleeing, son, Jack intervened. It's a strategic retreat. We know the terrain better than they do. In the caves, I'll be your eyes. The patriarch's statement silenced any protest. Jack, the man who had lost his sight, would now be the group's guide in the total darkness of the caves, an irony that escaped no one. "Martha," called Jack, extending his hand to his wife, "go to the bedroom and get the wooden box that's under our bed. Don't make noise." Martha silently obeyed, returning minutes later with a carved box that she handed to her husband. Jack opened it carefully, revealing an old revolver and a small amount of ammunition. "I never needed to use this in all my life," he explained, handing the weapon to Barnes, "but I always knew the day might come." Barnes checked the gun with precise movements. "It's in good condition. It can be useful as a last resort, but our best weapon now is our knowledge of the terrain." Major, who had remained by the door, suddenly became more alert. His tense body indicated that the threat was approaching. "It's time to go," Barnes decided. "Ryan, help your father. Emma, stay with your mother. I'll take the rear with Major. Move in absolute silence." With surprising coordination, the group exited through the back door, using the darkness as an ally. The night was clear with a starry sky that provided enough light to orient themselves. Staying crouched and close to the vegetation, they advanced toward the old barn, located about 200 yards from the main house. "There are at least 3 people circling the house," Barnes whispered when they were halfway there. "They're armed and using tactical equipment. This isn't a group of common thieves." "They're professionals," agreed Jack, who even without seeing perceived the gravity of the situation. "Hired by someone with resources and specific interest in the caves." As they approached the barn, they heard the sound of engines in the distance, more vehicles approaching the ranch. "They're bringing reinforcements," Barnes murmured. "We need to hurry." Jack guided the group to the rocky formation he had mentioned. To untrained eyes, it appeared to be just a pile of stones and dense vegetation, but the patriarch knew exactly where to look. "Move those bushes aside," he instructed. "The entrance is low. We'll have to enter crouching." Ryan and Barnes removed the vegetation, revealing a narrow, almost imperceptible opening. One by one they entered the passage, with Major following them silently, as if understanding the need for discretion. Inside the cave, the darkness was absolute. Barnes finally turned on the flashlight, revealing a rocky tunnel that extended beyond the reach of the light. "Now it's up to you, Jack," said the ex-sergeant, offering his arm to his friend. "Guide us." To everyone's surprise, Jack moved with confidence and dexterity through the tunnel, as if he could actually see. His steps were firm, his hand occasionally touching the rocky walls to confirm the path. "I know every inch of this place," he explained, sensing the amazement of the others. "After I lost my sight, I came here regularly so I wouldn't forget the way. It's as if the map were engraved in my mind." They advanced about 500 yards until they reached a wider chamber, where several passages branched in different directions. "This is the critical point," Jack informed them. 5 tunnels, each leading to a different destination. "The middle one goes to the border with Pine Creek. The one on the right ends at a point on the river. The other 3 have exits in different parts of the mountain range." "Which one should we follow?" asked Emma, looking fearfully at the dark openings. Jack reflected for a moment. "The 3rd tunnel," he decided. "It will take us to neighbor Joe's property. From there we can ask for help." While they discussed the next step, Major suddenly tensed, his ears pointed toward the cave entrance. A distant sound, almost imperceptible, to humans had alerted the animal. "They found the entrance," Barnes concluded, immediately turning off the flashlight. "And they're coming after us." "Let's take the 3rd tunnel," Jack ordered. "But first I have an idea. Ryan, help me find some loose stones, many of them." Quickly, father and son collected several medium-sized stones, while Barnes and Emma remained, alert to any sound coming from the entrance. "Let's scatter these stones at the mouth of the other tunnels," Jack explained. "When they arrive, they'll see marks in all the entrances and won't know which one we took." With this strategy implemented, the group entered the 3rd tunnel, with Jack leading the way in the darkness. Behind them, the sound of voices and flashlights indicated that their pursuers had reached the main chamber. "Stay calm," whispered the patriarch. "I know this path like the back of my hand. There's a widening ahead where we can stop and decide our next move." Major, who was walking beside Jack, suddenly stopped and emitted a deep sound. Everyone froze in place, anticipating danger. The widening of the tunnel was a small natural chamber where centuries-old stalactites hung from the ceiling like mineral fingers pointing to the damp floor. Jack guided the group to this space where they could finally pause and reassess the situation. "We're approximately a mile from the entrance," the patriarch explained in a low voice. "The tunnel continues for another 2 miles before reaching Joe's property." Barnes briefly turned on the flashlight, keeping the light directed at the ground to minimize dispersal. He checked his watch. It was past midnight. "We need to come up with a plan," the ex-sergeant declared. "We can't simply run indefinitely. At some point we'll have to face this situation." Major, who had been restless since they stopped, moved a few yards away and began scratching the rocky floor with his front hooves. Ryan directed the flashlight toward the spot and was surprised to discover that the goat had found a small lateral, opening almost imperceptible, partially covered by sediments. "Dad, I think Major found something," whispered Ryan, approaching the opening. Jack, using his heightened sense of touch, explored the discovery. A smile illuminated his wrinkled face. "I completely forgot about this," he admitted almost enthusiastically. "It's a secondary passage, very narrow. We used to call it the smuggler's path when we were young, because only a thin person can fit through it." "And where does it lead?" asked Emma, a thread of hope in her voice. "It makes a detour and comes out at another point in the main cave, about 300 yards ahead. It's like a winding shortcut." Barnes quickly analyzed the implications of this discovery. "This gives us an advantage. We can split the group. Some will go the obvious main way, deliberately, leaving marks to be followed. The others use this narrow passage and come out behind them, surprising them." "It's risky to split up," warned Martha, her face pale with concern. "Riskier is continuing all together, as easy targets," Barnes countered. "Faster. Jack, you and Martha follow the main tunnel with Emma, leaving obvious tracks. Ryan and I, being more agile, will go through this opening with Major and try to catch our pursuers by surprise." Jack hesitated, considering the proposal. "I don't like the idea of separating, but it makes strategic sense," he finally agreed. "I know the main path well and can guide Martha and Emma without difficulty, but how will we reconnect?" "There's a unique rock formation about 1.5 miles from here that looks like an outstretched hand," replied Barnes. "We'll meet there. If one group doesn't arrive within 30 minutes after the other, we continue to the exit and seek help." With the plan established, the group prepared to split up. Before departing, Jack embraced his son firmly. "Be careful, my son. Don't take unnecessary risks." "You too, Dad. We'll see you at the Stone Hand," Ryan replied, his voice choked with emotion. Barnes handed Jack's gun to Ryan. "You might need this more than I do. Remember, it's a last resort." While the first group followed the main tunnel, Ryan, Barnes and Major crawled through the narrow secondary passage. The space was so tight that they needed to crawl on all fours in some stretches, with Major surprisingly adept at squeezing through the tightest spaces. "How can a goat fit through here?" muttered Ryan, scraping his elbow on a rocky protrusion. "Major isn't an ordinary goat," Barnes replied with a tense smile. "He was trained for special situations. His body is more flexible than it appears." After about 20 minutes of slow and uncomfortable progress, they felt a current of fresh air, indicating they were approaching the exit of the passage. Barnes signaled for them to advance with maximum caution. Emerging at a wider point of the main tunnel, exactly as Jack had described, they could finally stand upright again. Major took the lead, his alert ears capturing sounds that humans couldn't perceive. "They're close," whispered Barnes, noticing the animal's tense posture. "Let's position ourselves behind those rock formations and wait." They didn't have to wait long. 3 armed men were slowly advancing through the tunnel, their flashlights illuminating the path ahead. They were following a 4th man, whom Ryan immediately recognized despite the mask partially covering his face. It was Paul Matthews, the supposed goat buyer who had visited the ranch days before. "It's him," whispered Ryan, feeling a wave of anger. "The man who appeared at the ranch asking questions." "Keep calm," advised Barnes. "Let's listen to what they're saying before making any move." The intruders had stopped a few yards away, examining marks on the ground that had probably been left by Jack's group. "They can't be far," said one of the men. "The tracks are recent." "We can't waste more time," replied the man Ryan had identified as Paul Matthews. "The old man knows these caves better than anyone. We need to catch up to them before they can contact the authorities. And when we find them?" asked another man, his deep voice subtly echoing off the cave walls. Paul Matthews paused before answering, his voice as cold as the damp air around them. "No witnesses. The boss was clear. These caves are the perfect access for the operation, and the ranch is the ideal control point. We can't have interference." Ryan felt his blood freeze upon hearing those words. He exchanged a look with Barnes, who remained impassive, but whose tension was evident in the way he firmly gripped a large stone he had picked up. Major, who had been absolutely motionless until then, suddenly emitted a sharp bleat, breaking the silence and revealing his position. "What was that?" exclaimed one of the men, pointing his flashlight in the direction of the sound. At that moment, everything happened very quickly. Barnes threw the stone he was holding, hitting the main flashlight and plunging the tunnel into semi-darkness. Major darted forward, colliding with the legs of one of the intruders and knocking him down. Ryan, propelled by survival instinct, emerged from his hiding place brandishing the gun his father had given him. "Don't move," he shouted, trying to control the tremor in his voice. The confusion that followed was chaotic. The intruders, surprised by the sudden attack, momentarily retreated. Paul Matthews, however, quickly recovered from the initial surprise. "You're just a farmer and a retired cop," he said with contempt. "You have no idea what you're up against or who's behind this." Barnes stepped forward, his posture exuding the authority of years of police service. "Maybe we don't know who's behind it, but we know enough to end your plans. The authorities have already been notified about the suspicious activities in the region." It was a bluff, but delivered with such conviction that it sowed visible doubts in the eyes of the intruders. Paul Matthews, however, didn't seem convinced. "You're lying, Sergeant Barnes. We know very well that there hasn't been time to contact anyone." "Are you sure about that?" Barnes countered, maintaining his composure. "The goat that knocked down your companion isn't an ordinary animal. It's a special K9 unit, trained for reconnaissance and communication missions. Why do you think I brought him to the ranch?" The mention of Major as a special unit caused visible hesitation among the men. The goat himself, as if understanding his role in that crucial moment, positioned himself next to Barnes with an almost military stance. The impasse seemed about to break, when suddenly sounds of movement came from the direction Jack and the women had headed. Everyone turned their attention to that point, momentarily distracted. The sounds of movement in the tunnel grew, echoing off the rocky walls. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't just Jack's group emerging from the darkness. Powerful flashlights cut through the dim light, revealing official uniforms of the Environmental Police and men with federal badges. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, nobody move!" shouted a commanding voice. Paul Matthews and his accomplices, trapped between Ryan and Barnes on one side and the authorities on the other, slowly dropped their weapons. In front of the police, officers walked Jack, with a serene smile on his face, guiding the agents with the same confidence with which he traversed the paths of his ranch. "How?" stammered Ryan, astonished by the unexpected arrival of reinforcements. A familiar figure stepped forward among the police officers, neighbor Joe, longtime friend of the Wilson family. "Your father is a very clever man," explained Joe. "When they arrived by the main passage, he had already sent Martha and Emma to seek help through a shortcut I know well. I was already in contact with the authorities for days, since I noticed strange movements around my property too." Barnes approached the agent in charge of the operation, a middle-aged man with a keen look. "Agent Mitchell," he greeted with a respectful nod. "I see my reports were finally taken seriously." "Sergeant Barnes," replied the agent, "your suspicions were correct. We've been monitoring this group for months, but we never had concrete evidence. Until now." As the police officers handcuffed the intruders, Major remained at Jack's side like a faithful guardian. The patriarch stroked the black fur of the animal, a gesture of deep gratitude. "Who are these people really?" asked Ryan, watching Paul Matthews being led out of the caves. Agent Mitchell looked gravely at the young man before answering. "They're part of an organization that uses strategic rural properties to establish smuggling routes. The caves under Hope Valley Ranch would be perfect for their purposes, isolated, virtually unknown, and crossing state lines. So it was never about our land itself, concluded Jack. The land was just a means to access the real treasure. The caves, confirmed the agent, they have a pattern of operation. First, they meticulously study the property, then try to intimidate the owners into selling or abandoning the place. Emma and Martha joined the group, both visibly relieved by the outcome. The young woman hugged her brother tightly, while the matriarch walked directly to her husband, holding his hand firmly. "Your courage saved our family, Jack," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It wasn't courage, Martha. It was the certainty that we needed to protect not just our land, but also prevent it from being used for wrong purposes." Hours later, with dawn already announcing itself on the horizon, the Wilson family returned to Hope Valley Ranch, escorted by the police officers. The house was exactly as they had left it, except that the power had been restored. On the porch, tired but relieved, everyone gathered for coffee prepared by Martha. "What will happen to Paul Matthews and the others?" asked Emma. "They'll face serious charges," replied Barnes. "The most important thing is that the investigations will continue to identify all those involved, especially the financiers of the operation." Jack, sitting in his usual rocking chair, seemed thoughtful. "You know, during all these years when I couldn't see, I learned to view the world differently. I realized that sometimes in darkness we find strengths we didn't know we had." Major approached silently, lying at the patriarch's feet like a faithful guardian. "Ryan," observed the animal with new respect. "What about Major?" he asked. "Was he really trained by the police like you said?" Barnes smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Agent Mitchell. "Major isn't just a goat trained by the police. He's part of an experimental program that was officially terminated, but continues operating secretly." "Experimental program?" repeated Ryan, intrigued. "Animals with exceptional natural abilities, selected and trained for special missions," explained the agent. "Major is one of the most successful. His ability to detect suspicious patterns, environmental alterations, and specific behaviors is extraordinary." The revelation left the Wilson family in a state of admiration. They looked at the black goat with a mixture of amazement and gratitude, finally understanding the true extent of his abilities. A week later, with the ranch returning to its normal routine, the Wilson family received a visit from Agent Mitchell. He brought important news and an unusual proposal. "The investigations have advanced more quickly than we expected," he informed them, accepting the cup of coffee Martha offered. Paul Matthews confessed everything, revealing important names. "The organization is being dismantled at record speed." "That's excellent news," commented Jack, nodding with satisfaction. "But that's not all that brings me here," continued the agent. "We're expanding our special animals program. The caves under your property would be a perfect location for training and operations. Of course, with your authorization and participation." The proposal caught the family by surprise. Ryan was the first to react. "Are you suggesting we transform part of the ranch into a training base for special agent animals?" The agent smiled. "Not exactly a formal base, but a discreet support point. With Jack's experience in the caves and Barnes's knowledge of the program, it would be an ideal partnership." Jack thoughtfully stroked his gray beard before responding. "You know, Agent, when I lost my sight, I thought my usefulness to the world had diminished. Now I realize I was just preparing to see beyond the obvious. If our caves and our knowledge can help protect other families like ours, then my answer is yes." Major, who had been lying quietly during the entire conversation, suddenly rose and walked to the center of the room, positioning himself between Jack and the agent as if sealing the agreement with his presence. "Seems like Major also approves of the idea," commented Barnes with a smile. That afternoon, as the sun set, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains golden, the Wilson family gathered on the porch to contemplate their land. Hope Valley Ranch, which for generations had been just a piece of Virginia, now harbored a secret that few would know. Beneath its gentle hills hid not only a natural labyrinth of caves, but a silent network of protection. And at the center of this new phase, a man who couldn't see with his eyes but saw with his heart, and an extraordinary goat who had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are those who best understand the true meaning of vigilance and loyalty. "You?" "No, Major," said Jack, stroking the animal's fur as the sunset colored the sky. "I think we have something in common. People underestimate us because of what seem to be our limitations, without realizing that they're precisely what make us special." The goat responded with a gentle brush against his hand, as if perfectly understanding the meaning of those words. And so under the orange sky of Virginia, Hope Valley Ranch began a new chapter in its history, a story of courage, intuition, and the extraordinary connection between humans and animals who together form the most unlikely and efficient of alliances.